Good afternoon to everybody. Welcome to this MED dialogue in the framework of MED 2020, which will be the sixth edition of MED. It will be a dialogue this afternoon with the Minister of State of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of UAE, Anwar Gargash. Welcome this afternoon, and it will be a dialogue between him and Marc Perelman de France 24, who's connected with us. Marc, good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
And myself. So in a very special year, we are saying that all the time, 2020, which has been signed by COVID-19, but also has been signed by many events in foreign politics. United Arab Emirates is playing a key role in the region, and not just in the region. So this is why we're so grateful to our guest here, to Minister Gargash, to give us the time to talk with him in this dialogue. Marc, I think I will leave the floor to you for the beginning of our dialogue.
Thank you very much, Monica. Minister Gargash, as Monica rightly pointed out, this has been a key year, and the UAE has played a central role. Obviously, the main event that people will probably remember is the normalization of ties between your country as well as Bahrain and Israel under the patronage, if I may use that word, of the, well, now outgoing US President Donald Trump. I want to ask you a question, because I know you personally have been very involved in this, and we see this evolving every day. First commercial flight as we speak between Dubai and Tel Aviv. Has it been long in the making? And secondly, obviously, this has been deemed as a stab in the back by the Palestinians. So I want to ask you this kind of two-folded question to begin with.
Well, Marc, thank you very much, Marc, Monica, for this opportunity. I think I want to start by saying it has been long in the making and short in the making, meaning that the sort of relationship with Israel has developed in small incremental steps over the years, but not significant to really call it a bilateral relationship, but short in the making in a sense that the American administration recognized in June that we might have a deal where we can actually marry normalization with the issue of the suspension of annexation of Palestinian lands. So that gave us the window to do this now, which actually answers the question that some people ask, why now? Because we had that opportunity. If we did not have that window, I would have speculated that we would have seen this normalization perhaps next year or the year or the year after. I think the Palestinians recognized that this is a major change. So if you really compare some of the early angry statements with later, I would say, much more sober assessments, we have to look at that. So, for example, recently the Palestinians have announced that they will resume their contacts with the State of Israel. They will also that they will also collect the taxes, and that they will return their ambassadors that they had recalled to the UAE and to Bahrain, which brings us to the old adage. The old adage basically says, if you are not there, you have lost 80% of your case. So clearly our assessment has always been, these are difficult times for the Palestinians, but they need to be engaged, they need to be there. And countries like us and other Arab countries will also help them in seeking a political solution. So this is my early response or first response to your question, Marc.
Dr. Gargash, you've been on the scene for quite a long time, and you can also predict a little bit the events. So let me pick up on what Marc was just asking you. Do you see this creating a sort of a momentum so that maybe Saudi Arabia will join, or someone else will feel the pressure of this new trend?
Well, again, you know, I mean, our fundamental issue is that the Abrahamic Accords does three things. The first thing, it's a bilateral sovereign decision. It is about the UAE and the belief by the UAE that we have to have more normal relations and be able to be in control of these relationships through dialogue, through contacts, etc., and separate whatever political issues we have from the ability to build also a normal relation in a functional way. I think secondly, the Abrahamic Accords is about breaking a strategic stalemate in the region. If the region is witnessing a strategic stalemate, how can you break that strategic stalemate? So the Abrahamic Accords is about that, is about saying, let us try something, because what we have tried previously has not worked. And we hope here that the potential here will have. Time will tell. The third issue, of course, is the main Israeli-Palestinian issue here. And the main Israeli-Palestinian issue is not something that the UAE can determine or other states can determine. This is something that the Palestinians and Israelis will have the capability and ability to determine. We want to encourage, we want to help, we want to be able to provide good offices there. And I've always said that if you really look, who are the two Arab countries that are most influential in supporting on the peace process? And they are Jordan and Egypt. And mainly because these two countries have relations with the Palestinians and they have relations with the Israelis. So we hope also that we will be able to help as we move forward.
Let me just add something on this, because you were rightly mentioning the window that in June created with the US administration. Obviously, now we're going through a transition. How do you see the future in this sense?
I think with the Middle East peace process, it looks good, but we need to engage, because fundamentally the Trump administration played an essential role in bringing these accords. But again, President-elect Biden was very effusive and very quick in his support of the Abrahamic Accord. So really what we have today is we don't have a Trump policy or a Biden policy. We have an American policy. And I think this is going to help a lot. And of course, I think we might actually see a return to American orthodoxy on a two-state solution, and I think this will also help. So I am quite optimistic. I'm very optimistic about the Palestinian decision also to look at this in a rational and sober way, and I think engagement will continue to be the key word. I'm not saying that the Palestinians don't have a very difficult task ahead of them, but I think with this sort of strategic opening, we have a new way of thinking, because clearly by running around in circles of not talking, refusing to climb down by both sides really, we have not been able to arrive at something that is doable. And I think we have an opportunity here.
Right. If I may follow up, one of the heritages of the Trump administration is the so-called deal of the century. This was deemed absolutely unacceptable by the Palestinians. They broke up diplomatic relations with the US because of that and other decisions by the Trump administration. On the other hand, if you go back to the usual system that has been used, usual diplomacy, which is very much what the Biden foreign policy team looks like, aren't we going back to the same issues of Jerusalem, the borders, and so on, which have led to the stalemate you just described?
Yeah. Well, again, I think number one is you've really put your fingers on one of the main issues. The main issues is you need American engagement in the Middle East peace process. The American engagement is essential, and we need America to be engaged between the Palestinians and Israelis. The Abrahamic Accords were not possible without American engagement. Regardless, if the Americans were not there, we would not have had the Abrahamic Accord. Now we have a new reality on the ground. As you mentioned, the Biden administration will most probably return to previous American positions, but we have to also understand, what about Jerusalem? Is that going to be a return to the previous American position on Jerusalem? We don't know yet. But I would say that the Palestinians have signaled that they are willing to engage. And I think we need to encourage them to do that, and we need to work with them to do that. I would also say that the difference between the Abrahamic Accords and the peace that you had between Israel and Egypt and Israel and Jordan is that this will be a warm peace. In a sense, we've never had a war with Israel. We have no borders with Israel. And Israel has an opportunity to build what I would call a constructive, normal relationship with an Arab country. This was not totally possible in the case of Egypt and the case of Jordan, because you had a lot of political issues also, and issues of land and wounds of wars, etc. Here you have a clean slate, and with that clean slate, you will be able to build something new that will help and support. As I said, I mean, we did not do this only because of the Palestinian issue. We did this because of our own consideration of how a bilateral relationship will benefit us, and at the same time, how will it affect the strategic view in the region and the Palestinian issue. So again, you know, the idea of condensing this about just one single reason is, I don't think, is very accurate.
Dr. Gargash, I was mentioning that in the introduction, your country, even yourself, are playing a greater role in the Gulf and in the regional balance of the Gulf. Nevertheless, I would like to take you back to the Mediterranean. We are doing our Med dialogue, and I want you to concentrate for a second on the Mediterranean and look at the new balances of power that are taking place in the Mediterranean. It's quite evident that Erdogan is trying to play a greater role there, is trying to interfere in many scenarios there. How do you assess this?
Well, again, let me first talk about the UAE. I think the two key things that I have to say. The first thing is why we are more active is because we see an international system that is changing, an international system that basically puts a lot of challenges on the nation state. So for us, we will be very happy not to be active. But unfortunately, with the changes in the international system, it drives you to take more of a responsibility. That's the first thing. The second thing, we are very cognizant of our size and impact. We are not a big country. We are a big economy, but we're not a big country. So very important for us in whatever we do is we do it with friends and allies. So in many things in the Mediterranean, for example, today, we work with Egypt, we work with France, we are more and more working with the Greeks, and we have been pushed in being active in the Mediterranean because the Turks also have taken a free hand in interfering in the Arab world. So clearly for us, when we see a Turkish role that is extending in various Arab countries, in Iraq, in Syria, in Libya, and understanding that Arab countries are open territory for Turkish influence, I think it is important for us to work with other Arab countries mainly Saudi Arabia, mainly Egypt, and some of the European countries to come and ask Turkey to play the role of a Westphalian country, the old Turkey of understanding that sovereignty has to be recognized, that non-interference is essential, that old imperialistic hubris does not belong to the 21st century. So for us, if we were not pushed here of countries like Turkey and Iran and others interfering in Arab countries, I don't think we will necessarily be very active along other Arab countries and taking positions that are geostrategically not part of our sort of traditional areas of interest.
Basically, you're trying to remind them the rules of the game.
I think as we move forward, the more countries respect the sovereignty of others, the more countries respect that they have no open involvement and interference in territories of others. I think the more we will have a rules-based regional system. And I think if you look at the Arab region, and we're always looking at the Arab region, if you look at the Arab region, the Arab region has been the worst that has been, at the receiving end of Turkish and Iranian intervention over the last few years. So what do you do for a country like us, or for a country like Egypt, or for a country like Saudi Arabia or Jordan or others? You coalesce and you say, let us try. And I don't think we are completely successful yet. We are not completely successful. But the message is very, very clear. Respect the Arab region, and the Arab region will respect you. I think this is the sort of message that we are trying to propagate.
Marc, you're muted.
Sorry, can you hear me now?
Perfect.
Yes.
Sorry, I was listening intensely, that's why. I want to follow up and be maybe a bit blunt. Do you think Recep Tayyip Erdogan is a danger to regional security? And then as a follow-up to lead to another issue where the UAE has also been involved, is this the case especially in Libya?
Yeah. Again, Mark, I want to start with Libya. We had every single NATO country ask us to be part of that coalition to unseat Colonel Gaddafi and to protect the Libyans. We had the American Secretary of State at the time, Hillary Clinton, urge us to be part of that coalition. French President at the time, Nicolas Sarkozy, to be part of it. Our planes were based in Italy. So we were part and parcel of that coalition, NATO coalition, to be in Libya. We were part of why the NATO coalition had the legitimacy of an Arab and Islamic presence. So it wasn't seen as a European effort or a Western effort against Libya. So clearly our interest in Libya goes to those days. Our concern has always been about extremism in Libya, about terrorism in Libya. And if you go back to the last few years, you will see that it has been a very tough fight in places like Derna and Sirte against Al-Qaeda and against Daesh and others. So we have been very interested in that fight because we don't think that that fight is confined to one country. It spreads from country to country. So we see our interest in Libya as very legitimate, as well as, of course, the Arab element of the involvement there. But clearly, since Berlin, we have really shifted and we have become, scrupulous in supporting a political process and ensuring that our role in Libya is very political. So here we did not, jump through parachute in Libya. There are clear roots of why we were there and clear legacy issue, like many, many other countries. And we've worked very clearly, hand in gloves, with the Egyptians and the French in Libya, that our position has been more or less quite the same, because as I said, we never work alone. We are too small as a country to work alone, but we are a great partner. So from that perspective, that is how we move. Vis-a-vis Erdogan and others, I think the region, let us take away the name of President Erdogan or President Rouhani or any other president. The region cannot afford populism anymore. The region cannot afford imperial dreams anymore. And the region cannot afford extremism, Islamic extremism or others anymore. We have lived in a period of 30 years of the rise of political Islam, and recently Iranian, and after that Turkish imperial hubris, populism. The region cannot afford this. Let us try the Westphalian model. Let us try respecting sovereignty, working together, because we have a common interest in stability in the region and prosperity in the region. So it goes beyond really the name Erdogan or the name Rouhani. It really is about changing course from imperial dreams, from populism, from Islamic extremism, to a course of what I would call respect of sovereignty and non-interference and cooperation and economic issues and issues of prosperity.
Just as a quick follow-up on Libya, just a very quick question. Are you optimistic that there will indeed be a deal and elections that are now scheduled for this coming December?
Well, we are cautiously optimistic. I mean, I've seen the deal. There are many details that can go wrong, but if there is a will among the Libyan parties and there is a good reservoir of trust, I hope that we are all successful as the international community. What we know very clearly is that no party in Libya, East or West, can actually win this militarily. And it's been like a pendulum swinging from left to right, right to left. And we have no option in Libya but a political solution. We have a course. It needs the international community to do a lot of hand-holding, and at the same time, it needs a lot of compromises by the Libyan parties with a reservoir of goodwill, because we all have an interest to see Libya stable, united, and prosperous.
While we move slowly towards the end of our discussion, let me just go back to a point that you just mentioned, Al-Qaeda and Daesh. Aren't you afraid that the fact that US is basically disengaging from Afghanistan, disengaging from Iraq, that there's a general underestimation of what's going on under the surface? How do you see the activities and the presence of these groups that have been so negative for the entire region and not the region?
I think the first thing is I understand very much American frustration at being involved in a never-ending war. After 2 decades of war, almost 2 decades of war in Afghanistan and Iraq, there is a genuine frustration that I understand. We have gone through a similar experience, though shorter, in Yemen. You can't end a war when you want to. And it's taken us a long time to extract ourselves from Yemen. So I understand that. I think that the concern with regards to extremism and terrorism remains very much alive today. And I think if you look really at many of the assessments of the experts on lone wolf attacks, separate attacks, and you look at cases recently in France, you can see that these assessments a few years ago are basically proving to be right today. So I would say that we have to remain vigilant in our collective approach to face extremism and terrorism, and not only terrorism, extremism and terrorism, because they are linked. So, again, we will have to wait and see with the new Biden administration of its reassessment on this. We have our concerns. I understand American frustrations, but I would say that the danger of extremism, the danger of terrorism is very much alive. And this is one of our major concerns here, and we need to work together on it.
And thank you so much for underlying this link between extremism and terrorism, because most of the time we underestimate it. Marc, would you take advantage of the last couple of minutes?
I would take advantage of something you just said about a country that's seen its share of pain and suffering, Yemen. You said we extracted ourselves from Yemen, and so this begs the question, was it a mistake to go to war in Yemen? Because clearly the situation is not solved.
These questions, these questions are never that categorical. Was it a mistake for the United States to enter Afghanistan after the 9/11 event? I think in Yemen, we achieved something, which was not allow a geostrategic shift in the region. We were successful in that. I think we saw a very difficult situation in Yemen. We achieved some things. We did not achieve all of our targets. I think it's very difficult today to go back with hindsight and say yes or no. But what we know currently is that today the only parties that have the solution in Yemen are the Yemenis themselves. And the Yemenis are wasting their time today for tactical advantages, whether it is the government, the Houthis, the other Yemeni parties, because Saudi Arabia is doing all it can to arrive at a political solution. The UN is doing all it can. We are all pushing for a political solution. And today, really, you have a very classic case where the local parties think that they can improve their situation in the ground. And what they think that they can do in 2 weeks takes 3 months, more suffering, rather than agreeing to ceasefire and moving forward with a political process. And that is what we are hoping today in Yemen.
Minister Anwar Gargash, thanks for sharing this time with us. Thanks for your outstanding insights in the region and the perspectives for the region and your country. Marc Perelman, thank you so much. I think that we all wish that next year MED will be in person and we can have the chance to rediscuss all this together. Thank you very much to you and to everybody who's connected right now and following MED Dialogues. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Marc. Thank you, Monica. Thank you.
Thank you.